Buy with Rob is your best choice when purchasing your new home in the Puget Sound area. Call 360-710-9425 today and get started on the best home buying experience you will ever have. Go to buywithrob.com today.
Hey, this is YD from the Ale Evangelist Show, and you're listening to the Podcast 99 Internet Radio Network.
Hey, did I tell you guys I got a goat?
I have a plan, sir.
Really, Boric? A cunning and subtle one?
Yes, sir.
As cunning as a fox who's just been appointed Professor of Cunning at Oxford University?
Yes, sir.
On the signal, company will advance!
Well, I'm afraid it'll have to wait. Whatever it was, I'm sure it was better than my plan to get out of this by pretending to be mad. I mean, who would have noticed another madman around here? Good luck, everyone.
Little column A, little column B.
Yeah, baby.
Well, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever you do. A lot of things happening in the world today. Most of them are far beyond our control, you might say. So perhaps it's time we took a pause and thought about life and thought about the laws of gravity, history, the Great War, Veterans Day, Remembrance Day, Armistice Day, politics and or the news. Don't touch that dial, just try to hear me out for a while. Well, it is the Friday before the Monday, which is Veterans Day, which is the official Veterans Day, but isn't the right day. The right day is the 11th. So Monday will be a holiday, even though the real holiday is on Sunday. Got all that? We're going to talk about Veterans Day and what it means to me and what it should mean to a lot of us, and we'll talk about that as well. Don't touch that dial. Just try to hear me out for a while. So here's how you get a hold of me. The text machine is area code 209-565-DAVE. That's 209-565-3283. The email, dave@thedavebowmanshow.com. And, of course, we're on the web. Just look for The Dave Bowman Show on Facebook, Twitter, iTunes. Leave us a review and a rating. That'd be nice. And on your non-denominational web search browser, go to thedavebowmanshow.com or podcast99.org. Either will get you to the live and on-demand shows. A loqui conditio. Greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge. So, as I said, this is Friday before, although normally we do a live show every morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time, but today is not live. Today is pre-recorded because it's plausibly live. That's the official name of the podcast, is plausibly live, because we record it live. Well, this is the third take of the plausibly live podcast today, because we keep running into little things, and by little I mean 8-year-old things. At any rate, tomorrow, Friday, right at 10 o'clock is his school presentation for Veterans Day, so I've got to be there for that. If you're a friend on Facebook, you can probably follow that there and see that. And then Monday is a federal holiday. My wife actually has the day off. My son has the day off, so I'm not going to be here on Monday. It's an opportunity for the three of us that we very rarely all three have a day like that off, where my wife hasn't worked for 3 or 4 days in advance. So she's exhausted. She has the whole weekend off. So we're going to do some family stuff this weekend. And so I will not be here on Monday. And I apologize in advance for that. But at the same time, I kind of don't, because it's Veterans Day and I'm a veteran, right? So it's my day to celebrate my veteranicity. Veteranadequacy? My veteranness? Anyway, you get the idea. I have mixed emotions about Veterans Day personally. Look, I'm a veteran. You know that if you've been around this show for more than 5 seconds, you know that I'm a veteran, and you know that I am obnoxiously proud of the fact that I am not only a veteran, I'm a submarine veteran. I was aboard the USS Michigan during the 1980s when she was brand new. I'm extraordinarily proud of what we did and my part in that. But I was sitting around the coffee table the other day. I went out and had coffee yesterday with a good friend of mine, Dale, who was also on the boat at the same time. In fact, I think we reported the same day. I'm not absolutely certain of that, but I know it was within, a couple of weeks of each other because we did the same patrols. We did 3 through 13, and both of us left after patrol 13 for different reasons. Dale was a nuke. He's a specialist in the reactor chemistry, and he is a really smart guy. He's really, really good at what he does. So good that the shipyard hired him. And he worked there for another 35 years, I guess, 30 years or something after he got out. So, he's a smart guy. And we shared a bunk room. I was in bunk room. We were both in bunk room 1. I was in rack 3. He was in rack 9, which are directly across from each other. And so I guess we saw a lot of each other coming and going in those days. And he was, we weren't really friends on the boat. I mean, we didn't hang out or anything together, but we were pretty friendly. And I liked him. I always liked Dale, and it was completely nice to see him at the reunion back in June. Although, and I'm still embarrassed by this, I completely got his name wrong. For some reason, and I know why the reason is, for some reason I thought he was Sam Thacker. I thought he was a completely different person. And it took 5 minutes to iron that out. But once we did, we got that ironed out. And it turns out, Dale, I have one of my favorite sea stories, and I probably shouldn't tell this, but I'm going to anyway because it's Veterans Day. So it's my show. It's Veterans Day, right? So we were doing what we call a missile move. We were in the explosive handling wharf and we're moving missiles. So there's missiles on the pier, there's missiles on the boat, there's containers up. And of course, every time you move missiles, there's a battalion of Marines and machine guns and all kinds of stuff. And we set up security areas topside, and you can't go in or out of those areas. Well, in the process of, because we're also doing some other stuff at the same time. And so a piece of equipment that Dale and his department use, it's called a DI water analyzer, accidentally got left topside and somehow or another got included in the security area, the aft end of the security area towards the engineering department, towards the engine room hatch. And I'm standing what we call perimeter guard that day. I wasn't the nuclear weapons security guard, I was a perimeter guard. So I'm outside the area, but it's my job to make sure that nobody wanders into the area from the back end of this thing. So I've got my 45 and my jacket, and I'm just kind of chilling out back there. And Dale comes topside and he says, "Oh man, I really need that piece of gear." And I'm like, "Dude, we can't get it out right now, but if you give me a few minutes, I'll get somebody else to take care of it and push it out or something from the inside." Well, in the meantime, his chief, guy by the name of Chief Ray, I'm not going to tell you his full name. Ray was a little hyper. He always reminded me of a Chihuahua because he was short, stubby, and always moving at about 1,000,000 miles an hour. Well, Ray found out about this thing being up there, and he came topside, and he started launching into me about, I want this thing out here right now, right this instant, get it out here, rah, rah, rah. And I'm like, Chief, it's security area. You know the rules. I can't just reach in there and get that. If I do, I'll get shot. And if you reach in there to get it, you'll get shot. I mean, it's not going to happen. Not like that. Don't worry. We're working on it. Well, that never satisfied him, so he ran back downstairs. A few minutes later, he comes back up topside with the chief engineer and this lieutenant commander who, we had two officers on the boat that were very Tom Selleck-like lookalikes. The engineer, chief engineer, was one of them. The other one was Doc Longstaff, Lieutenant Longstaff, who was awesome. Anyway, so they walk up to me at the security area, and Chief Ray is just jumping around, and chief engineer is just he's looking at the box, and he's looking at the rope, and he's looking at me, and he looks at Chief Ray jumping around and screaming and yelling, and it was hysterical. And finally, as everything kind of calmed down, because I didn't say a word, finally, as everything calms down, Chief Ray looks at the engineer and says, "Oh, and he said he would shoot me." And I reached down, as he said that, I just reached down and kind of patted the 45 on my hip. The engineer looked at me, looked at him, looked back at me, looked back at him and said, I believe he would, and turned around and walked away. And that was kind of the end of that one. I'm pretty sure we got the thing out of there. Anyway, Dale and I had a really good time having coffee yesterday and just sitting down and chatting about, the differences and how we saw things. And, we were so young. And I think that's the thing that I just kept fixating on yesterday was we were so young. I was 20 years old when I went to the boat. 20! I feel every bit of my 55 now. I know 55 is the new 40 and 50 is the new 30 and blah, blah. Yeah, that may all be true. And maybe it is, maybe it ain't. I don't know. But believe me, I'm 55 and I'm feeling 70 some days. It's hard to move some days. And it's, I feel my age and I look back at myself in those eras in that time and I think, man, I was such a kid. And I see the pictures and I got freckles and, it's just, it's a little unnerving to think, hey, this country used to trust a bunch of 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds with an $8 billion submarine. And we always thought, well, the officers, they're senior and they know things. And, talking to Dale, and most of them didn't have a whole lot of experience beyond what we had too. And my master chief, Joe Adamson. Joe is one of the most important people in my life, and he has since passed on. And I regret that I wasn't able to communicate with him before that happened. But I thought Joe was ancient. Joe had gray, salt and pepper hair, and he smoked a pipe, and he moved slow, and he took blood pressure medication. Joe was ancient. And I'm realizing now, looking back at it, that I was 20 and Joe was like 30. He wasn't that old. But it was an amazing thing to think how young we were. And of course, as veterans, you meet another veteran, your eyes meet, get that little smile on your face, you nod a little bit and you go on because it's a shared experience. It really is. There's that element to it that really connects us together. Whether you were a submariner or an aircraft carrier guy or a destroyer guy or a tanker or an artilleryman or an infantryman or a pilot or a ground crewman or a Coast Guards guy, it doesn't matter. Once, it's like brothers. I mean, we all fight with each other while we're in. We all, I love getting into it with other branches of services and even in our own branch, submariners and Airedales and the like. But we're all brothers, and when it comes to you fight one of us, you fight all of us is really what it comes down to. It's a wonderful experience. I highly recommend it to young people today. It's not for everybody. I'll be the first to tell you, and definitely submarining ain't for everybody. But if you have the right mindset for it, it is a very rewarding career. I just wish I'd have made a career of it. That's my regret. But when it comes to Veterans Day itself, Veterans Day, like I said, I have mixed emotions about it because while I appreciate the effort to honor veterans, and I'm one of them, and I certainly am taking my time to honor veterans, and at Ben's school today, there will be lots of veterans and lots of active duty people, and we'll shake hands and we'll smile and we'll pat each other on the back and tell sea stories and that kind of thing, and it'll be great. But there's that flip side of it that, people complain about the commercialization of Christmas. It's Halloween and they're already putting up Christmas decorations. Well, in some ways, Veterans Day has kind of become similar, hasn't it? I mean, everything is about the freebies on Veterans Day. What can I get for free on Veterans Day? And again, I know far too many veterans that take advantage of those things, and good on you. I'm not telling you not to do it. That's not what I'm telling you. What I'm saying is I feel a little weird about that. I don't really expect things just because I'm a veteran. I don't mind a 5% discount. If you ask me if I'm a veteran, I'll say yes. I'll show you my DAV card and we'll be on our way. But I'm not going to throw it in your face saying, "Hey, do you honor veterans by giving me a 5% discount?" That's just not the way I am. And it seems kind of commercial to me. It seems kind of like we're losing the spirit of the holiday, which of course is part of the problem, because the spirit of the holiday is confusing people. It really is. Social media which has changed the world in so many ways. You have this person on your social media feed. I have this person on my social media. I can tell you who they are. I guarantee you that late on the afternoon of the 10th, maybe even early in the morning of the 11th, something to this effect will be posted upon your social media feed, explaining to you the difference, hashtag know the difference, between Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a day to remember and honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice while serving in the military. They died. Veterans Day is to show appreciation to those who are in the military and are still living. Please know the difference, they will tell you. And they will do it in a tone that just really, I gotta be honest, it sets my teeth on edge. It really does. Because it's almost like this, we own this day and you will not celebrate it in a way that we don't approve of. And that's not what Veterans Day is, folks. It never was. In point of fact, prior to 1954, it wasn't even Veterans Day. That came about because the federal government wanted to manipulate things a little bit. And then later on in the 70s, they moved it to the Monday, so it would be a federal holiday. But prior to that, it was always known as Armistice Day or Remembrance Day. Armistice Day because it was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month when the guns fell silent. When World War I, at least the fighting portion of it, ended. I don't know if you've ever heard that tape. I tried to get the tape to play for you. It is awe-inspiring to hear that particular. Someone actually taped the Argonne front where the United States troops were. They actually taped that front so you can hear the audio until from a minute before to a minute after 11 o'clock. And you hear this just cacophony of fighting. And then at 11 o'clock, it just fades. And you actually hear a bird singing. It is the most remarkable thing I may have ever heard. Terry Gilliam some years ago did a timeline special that I still recommend. I'll probably link it at some point tomorrow so that everybody can see it. It's called The Final Minute. And it's about those final minutes of the First World War and the people that fell literally in the final seconds of the war. The United States, we had a general, an insane general, who knew that the armistice was going to go into effect at 11 o'clock, and so at 10:30, he decides to make a full frontal assault on a heavily armed German position. The Germans are in a position going, dude, go back, go back. They're saying it in German. The war's over, go back. Don't do this. And they did it anyway, because some general wanted to get a medal or something, or wanted to show off, wanted to get his people, involved a little bit more. I don't know. And men died because of that. It was insane. World War I was, we look at it today and we go, that's an insane war. From the very reasons that it began to the way it was fought. And we never make the connection that we're making the same mistakes again. And we've forgotten then that from that day, a year later, President Wilson began marking the day as a Remembrance Day and as Armistice Day, and a time to remember all those who fell in the First World War. And to this day, our allies, the United Kingdom, the Anzacs, the Australians and New Zealanders, mark this as Remembrance Day. They will wear their poppies. If you watch English football this weekend, you will see that all the teams are wearing poppies. You will see poppies everywhere in England this weekend. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's not crazy, but it's amazing to see. And why are they doing that? To remember everyone, including the Americans who perished during the fight during the First World War. The Americans that are still buried to this day, they still reside, they still rest in the Argonne Mews Cemetery, American Cemetery at Argonne Mews, for World War I. Not World War II, World War I. Our troops lie there. and they will be remembered by our allies. Why would we then say, well, we don't remember them today? Because, why would we do that when we could be remembering them in May instead? But got it. We're not going to do that. We're going to continue to do this our own way. World War I it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating history. It is incredible to look at World War I and think about all the things that we see in black and white, and with that weird kind of moving of the early video effects, and if you've ever seen stabilized and colorized film from that era, it's remarkable. It causes you to almost catch your breath. It is so shocking. We see it the way we see it, and so we have in our head that, it was a certain thing. But the incredible sacrifice, the incredible amount of death and destruction, and the futility of the whole thing, all over what? I mean, if you really had to say, what was the reason for all of this? You'd be hard-pressed to come up with a really good reason, wouldn't you? I mean, we all know there were entangling alliances, and there was this, and there was that, and there were arms races, and there was, the whole element that you'll get, depending on whose history you read of this thing, you get the whole, proletariat versus the common people thing, and you get the fact that they wanted to keep, there are people out there that think that the reason World War I is fought is to prevent revolutions from happening. So they get the proles out fighting a war. Well, they're fighting a war for us. They can't very well revolt against the monarchies, can they? There are people that still believe that and still teach that to this day. And maybe to some degree there's some truth in that. But there are so many different and varying reasons and causes here that sometimes it gets lost that what ended up happening was absolutely, utterly pointless, and really resulted in the destruction of the pre-modern world in so many ways. I mean, it wasn't just the losses of the monarchies. Monarchies probably would have and should have fallen anyway. But the sacrifice of 20 million lives to make it happen in a war that is fought everywhere. I mean, people don't even realize how many places World War I was fought. Tsingtao, China, the Falkland Islands, the Coronel Islands in the South Pacific, the East Africa, South Africa, Namibia, Italy. It was amazing. Gallipoli and Turkey and all kinds of places that this happened. And you look at a map today and you go, okay, here's a map of Europe before World War I, and here's a map of Europe today. And you look at it and you go, wait a minute, all of these countries disappeared after World War I and then came back after the end of the Cold War. What's up with that? Many of our problems in the Middle East can be traced to the First World War and not just the conduct of that war, but the post-war treaties that were made, the ideas that were put into play after the fact, after the war was over, and how we tried to manipulate things and tried to change things so that we could, even the losers could win in that, and that winners could maintain more of what they thought that they deserved as the victors. President Wilson's attempt to make a peace that would be a little more honorable and less about, who did what and who won. And, it was just too much sacrifice involved for that to be a real issue. And of course, many of the Allied powers to this day believe that our involvement in the First World War was a financial decision. We wanted to protect we couldn't let the Germans win, because if the Germans won, then we would never get our payments. We would never get our war debts paid off. And that continued into the 30s, debates and arguments about that kind of stuff, and questions and comments. And it was really problematic. It really was. But people to this day will tell you, I mean, they'll post that meme. It's Veterans Day. It's about the living, not the dead. But most of the world tomorrow will remember the fallen, not just of their country, but of our country as well. They'll be out there putting flags and poppies on our graves. The men who fell in service to the United States will be recalled as most of Europe and much of the rest of the Allied world recalls their deeds and their actions, and the fact that it was the arrival of American troops that really kind of pushed things over the edge and ended the nightmare. There's a lot of history there to unpack. There's a lot of things we could delve into. I'm not going to, because, again, it's an hour show and you don't have time to go through all those things. But I can tell you that you can't see it behind me, but there's a bottom shelf over there, down below that is entirely World War I books. I mean, that's all it is. And I find them fascinating. I find the whole history of that era fascinating. I find the people of that era to be incredibly interesting. And the way that we think that we're so much smarter than them, the way that we think that we're so much more intelligent, that we think we're all that in a bag of chips. And then you read what they did and why they did it, and you kind of catch your breath and go, wait a minute, these guys were doing the same things, and maybe we didn't think it through as well as we thought we did, right? Maybe there's something to this that's worth considering. But we don't, because we're so hung up on the fact that it's Veterans Day and we don't talk about those things. We just talk about honoring veterans and we give them free stuff. And I just kind of wish maybe we'd step back away from that a little bit and think about what this day really means and what it really was once upon a time. It's okay to honor veterans. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with the idea that you're going to say thank you to me for my service and thank you to Dale for his service and thank you to all my other shipmates. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. But I do have a problem with the idea that we might forget, because we have this it's our day and mentality, that we might forget those men. Because really, it was their day long before it was mine, right? I think so, anyway. What do you think? Area code 209-565-DAVE. 209-565-3283 is the text machine. I got to take a little break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Opiates has taken everything and everyone I've ever loved away from me. Everything. I blew my ankle out and I got prescribed pain pills by my doctor. If making my detox public is going to help somebody, I'm all for it. I just wish I would have had a warning.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth. A message from Truth, the Ad Council, and ONDCP.
1 in 6 seniors faces the threat of hunger, and millions more live in isolation. Drop off a hot meal and say a quick hello. Volunteer for Meals on Wheels by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org. This message brought to you by Meals on Wheels America and the Ad Council.
This is Betty White. I know you don't need one more thing to worry about, but listen, high blood pressure can cause kidney damage, blindness, heart attack, stroke, and you can have high blood pressure even if you feel all right. 1 in 7 adults has it, but it's easy to get your blood pressure checked, and you can treat it if it is too high. So don't worry about it, don't ignore it, just see your doctor and check it out.
For your free booklet, visit the Will Rogers Institute at wrinstitute.org and find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Everyone knows someone with arthritis. About 54 million adults in the United States have it. The majority are between the ages of 18 and 64. Arthritis is a leading cause of disability and causes pain, aching, stiffness, and swelling of the joints. Many people with arthritis have diabetes, heart disease, or obesity. Arthritis can make it harder to manage these conditions. It is not a normal part of aging. Physical activity like walking, swimming, or biking may not seem like the logical choice when you have arthritis pain. However, being physically active can decrease pain and improve physical function by about 40%. Still, 1 in 3 adults with arthritis are inactive. People with arthritis can also reduce their symptoms by participating in educational programs to learn how to better manage their condition and deal with pain, fatigue, anxiety, and depression. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
In the wake of a disaster, what one thing can you send that will help people the most? A blanket, a tent, a sandbag, a doctor. Actually, if you send a monetary donation, you send all these things. Even a small donation can make a big impact and can quickly become exactly what people affected by disaster need most.
In the wake of a hurricane, your monetary donation can make a huge difference to those in need. To donate, visit supporthurricanerelief.org. That's supporthurricanerelief.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
It started off as a normal day. I felt fine when I arrived at the plant.
Ruth Junius's life was about to change.
Then I dropped my keys. They kept slipping out of my hand. My arm felt numb. A coworker asked me if I was okay, and I couldn't speak. I started to get scared.
Ruth was having a stroke. People around her weren't sure what to do.
They thought I should go home or lie down, but I knew something was very wrong. I wrote 911 on a piece of paper with my other hand, and someone called for me.
Because everyone acted quickly, doctors at the hospital were able to give Ruth treatment that started to reverse the symptoms.
Within a few minutes, I was talking again. I didn't know a thing about stroke before I had one. Now I make sure that my friends and family know all the signs of stroke so they'll get help fast if they need it.
No stroke. Know the signs. Act in time. Call 1-800-352-9424 for more information. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
To buy your home, you became a house hunting ace, learned about loans, scoured neighborhoods, and asked the right questions. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
What's up, Whitey?
Hey, Scotsman.
We're from the Ale Evangelist Show, and you are listening
to the Podcast 99 Internet Radio Network.
Radio Network.
Welcome back to Zy Dave. Friday episode of The Big Show. You want to join me? Area code 209-565-DAVE. It's 565-3283. Show's plausibly live today, meaning we're recording it live, but we're not doing our standard live broadcast, 10 a.m. Pacific, which is when we're normally here. Why? Because I'm at my son's school for his presentation of... They do a presentation every year for Veterans Day, and I want to be a part of that. So I found that tape. I was talking about that tape that of the World War I battlefield at 11 o'clock. Let me see if this will run. So this is the actual sounds. This was actually recorded November 11th, 1918 at 10:59 a.m. Just listen to this. Is that incredible? I mean, you're actually hearing the sounds of the battlefield that day. Sorry. Didn't mean it to start over again. I should have hit the stop button, but I didn't. So it was a remarkable thing that day. And I just think that the idea that we can somehow or another say that Veterans Day is only for the living veterans, I reject that ideology because of the root of Veterans Day is Armistice Day. It's Remembrance Day. And we can remember those who fell in World War I, because really, when we get to Memorial Day, how often do they bring up World War I? They talk about the Civil War because that's when Memorial Day was born. They talk about, World War II vets are dying at the rate of 400 or 500 a day now. You're talking about Vietnam vets and Korean vets, but nobody talks about World War I. There's nobody left to talk about it. And so we forget about those things. For me, there's actually an interesting connection to it. I find World War I to be absolutely fascinating, particularly from a naval standpoint. Why? World War I was the last real mano-on-mano war. Now, there were battles during the Second World War that were this way, but the entirety of the war at sea was not. The entirety of the World War I at sea was done visually. You had to lay eyeballs on your target. And we don't think about some of the things that were involved with that. The ships burned coal, not oil. And so there were thick billowing smokes when ships would be in lines, and so they had to signal each other with flags. They didn't have wireless. They didn't have radio. It did, but it was in its nascent eras, and it wasn't reliable. So you signaled with flags, and you did maneuvering. And the most amazing thing is that the hit rate for the big guns on these ships, this is a typical British battleship of that era. The hit rate, so there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 15-inch guns there. This is HMS Iron Duke, which was the flagship of Admiral Jellicoe at the Battle of Jutland. The hit rate for these guns was about 5%. So this ship fires off 100 rounds out of those big guns. 5 might hit the target. 5. And what you don't comprehend and what you don't see is there were 20 or 30 of these ships in the line. And they're all firing simultaneously. And even if you have 10 of them firing 10 shots at a time, well, 10 shots at a time from 10 guns is 100 rounds. 5 of them are going to hit whatever they're firing at on a good day. And it's fascinating to see. And you think to yourself, well, that's going to mess up a ship's day. I mean, these are 15-inch shells. Some of them are going to be duds. Some of them are going to hit heavily armored portions of that ship and bounce off. Some of them are going to go through, that top mast up there, and it's just going to go through it because there's nothing there to actually detonate the shell. How many of these shells are actually going to hit something and detonate in a way that's going to cause critical problems? And you'd be surprised how many of it is. Some years ago, I think it was about 3 years ago, Pat the lawyer got me for a birthday. He sent me an Amazon gift card, and I bought a book about the Battle of Jutland because it's something that fascinates me. And one of the things that this book does an incredible job that we don't think about at all is it talks about the human carnage on these ships. And the fact that, okay, ship takes a 15-inch shell or an 8-inch shell, and it takes a hit like that, and men get blown to pieces. And they get hurt, and they're bleeding, and some of them are getting burned, and some of them are getting, limbs cut off, and they're all over the decks, and the ship is still fighting. The ship is still steaming, it's still maneuvering, it's still doing all these things. And all of this is going on. And there's no foxholes to hide in. There's no place to run. I mean, you just pretty much stay there, and it's we don't think about that. And the absolute carnage that's involved with all this. It's really remarkable to me. I mean, it really is. And I have a personal connection to the First World War and its naval vessels. This is the USS Frederick. Now, originally she was named USS Maryland, but in the 1920s, late 1919s, early 1920s, the United States changed all the names of its cruisers, which were named after states, to cities in the particular states that they were. And there's a reason why, because they were building battleships then, and they wanted to name battleships after states. So they changed the names of the cruisers. So originally this was USS Maryland, but she had her name changed in 1919, I believe, to USS Frederick. So she was what was called an armored cruiser. And even in 1914, she was obsolete. She, with the dreadnoughts and the speed geared turbines and things like that, the ships were starting to come out with, these cruisers were second line ships at best. And so shortly after the First World War, in fact, in 1920, USS Frederick was decommissioned and she was sent to San Francisco to be dismantled, taken apart, and done away with. Now, one of the things that's unique to American ships of the early 20th century are what we call the cage mast. And you see that mast there, that front that's made, it looks like a cage. Now, there's a lot of debate as to why we did this. Most of it was to save weight, because you don't want a mast that goes up that high. At the very top of that mast is where your fire control spotters sit. And so they look out from there, and they're judging where your gunshots are going, because you want to get more than 5 hits out of 100. Well, the higher that tower is, the better off you can see, the farther you can see. So we made those towers very high. If you compare them, you can see that it's much, much taller in general than the Iron Duke's one. But you notice that they're using a tripod mast. The reason they used a tripod mast on the British ships was vibration. This didn't shake nearly as much as ours did in these cage masts. And remember, these are two different kinds of ships. So the Frederick is about maybe half the size of that one. So you can see where that tower goes up. And if you look at the American battleships, they look the same way. But the problem with these cage masts were that they vibrated horribly. And there's a famous picture of the USS Michigan, our predecessor, where in a storm it actually bent and broke and fell over. But we insisted on using these things, and we kept using them well into World War II. And in fact, some of our ships, the Colorado and the USS Maryland, still had their cage masts when the war ended. We never did do away with them. But that particular cage mast right there on USS Frederick was taken off of that ship in 1920, and it was taken, this is a picture of it being installed, and it was taken to a cave, Moaning Cavern, just outside of Calaveras, in Calaveras County, California. And today you can put your hand on that. You can climb those steps right there that are the same steps that went up this mast, and you can put your hand on it, and you can see that steel is well over 100 and plus years old. 118, more than 118 years old. And I guess for me, that's kind of my connection to it. I was fascinated by that fact, and I put my hand on that, and I kept coming back to the idea that this mast is from a ship that served during the First World War. This is something, I'm a very tactile person when it comes to history. I love to put my hands on history. I love to touch things that are historical. I'm not trying to excuse it or explain it or anything like that. It's just the way I am. I like to go places and put my hands on walls. And when I was in Israel, I had to touch everything, which sometimes would get me in trouble and sometimes it was fine. And you get the idea. But for me, standing there when I finally understood what that was, because when you get there, they tell you it's USS Maryland, and they show you a picture of the battleship USS Maryland, which replaced the armored cruiser USS Maryland, which was renamed Frederick. Anyway, it's one of those pedantic historian things where I understood innately that was not the right ship. And so I went on this quest while we were standing there waiting with my barely working internet connection to find the right ship. And of course, there she was. And she was in San Francisco at the right time. They went over and got the mast, and they brought it into this cave, and they brought it down there. And to this day, visitors climb down those steps of a World War I era United States naval ship. It's fascinating to me. And you think to yourself, who else might have climbed down these steps? Who were people that served in World War I? How old were they? Were they 20 years old when they joined the Navy then? And were they fire controlmen like me that climbed up to the top of this thing to spot the shells and, stand out there on that platform or sit out there on that platform with their binoculars or whatever optics they might have had, and absolutely no protection whatsoever, none, not even from the weather, let alone incoming shells or the vibrations that were happening in the mast and those kind of things. It's just, it's a piece of history that for me was important and a really deep connection for me. In fact, all the wonders of that cave, and Moaning Cavern has a lot of wonders. Ben still talks about how much he enjoyed that. And for me, it was all about climbing that mast. And of course it was the October after my surgery? So I was still trying to learn to walk, and and they kept telling me, we can take you down another way. And I'm like, no, I want to climb these steps. I want to go down these steps. And so I did it. It hurt, but I did it. And I just, for a few moments, I just kind of felt like I was, out there on old USS Frederick, USS Maryland as she once was, patrolling the Atlantic, wondering if we were going to run into German raider ships or U-boats or whatever, and what kind of action stations we would be called to if we ever had to do that. Imagine being the guy out there with the searchlight, having to stand out there and guide the searchlight. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? That's how they used to do it. It was mano on mano. You had to see your enemy. You had to see everything that was happening in front of you. And your admirals had to see it, and your commodores had to see it, and your division leaders had to see it, and everybody had to signal each other with flags, and the ships had to turn, and it just turned into chaos. And death and destruction and this maelstrom of steel flying and splinters every time a shell would hit. That's what actually got people. It wasn't the ship. It wasn't the ship being hit by the shell. It was the splintering. Everything from the wooden decks that would splinter to the steel itself that the ship was made of would splinter apart. And those splinters would go flying, and they would just like shrapnel. They'd just cut through things. Horrifying. Horrifying. But we're not supposed to think about them today. We're supposed to think about veterans, because it's Veterans Day, don't you know? We don't think about the dead. We think about the living. That's what this is about on Armistice Day and Remembrance Day. Well, maybe if we took some time to think about that instead, maybe if we took the time to realize that there are a whole lot of Americans buried in France today who died during the First World War. And it was on this day, November 11th, 1918, the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour, that those guns finally fell silent. That insane destruction stopped. That men were able to finally climb up out of their fighting holes, their trenches, their foxholes, and say, I made it. That bit I played for you at the very beginning of the show is from a show called Blackadder Goes Forth. Blackadder's a very funny show, don't get me wrong. But it won more millions of hearts by its portrayal of that final moment, where after spending years trying to get out of this insane war, they have to go over the top, and they don't make it. And the final shot is this field of destruction and death and bodies, and it fades from this destruction to this field of red poppies, which grew everywhere. In Flanders, in France, poppies grew everywhere because the bodies that were dissolving in the ground underneath it were the perfect fertilizer. And the poppies that if you go to a parade that the VFW will try to hand to you and ask for a very small donation are just a reminder of all those men who fell, all those people who died. And maybe if we looked at it that way, it might remind us, I guess, once in a while that it ain't about the freebies, folks. Sure, they're nice. I'm not taking anything away from that, and I'm not telling you don't do it. That's not what I'm saying. But maybe, just for a moment, remember those men who did not make it back from the First World War. Because this was their day. It's still their day. And it always will be their day.